4 block jumps are far from the hardest jumps in Minecraft, but still, who likes them? They are just horrible, hideous. If I'm playing a parkour map and I run into one of these without any momentum setup, I just don't want to play the game anymore. I can't make you not hate them, but I can make them a little more bearable. And what I want to teach you will be applicable to any long jump like the 4 block. What is this golden rule I speak of? Jump straight. Haha, obvious. But I'm going to go further into this basic, obvious principle in ways that I assume most people do not think about. So think about this. It's not hard to look straight and jump. We do it all the time in parkour, right? But how often are you looking really straight? Like your line of vision is exactly perpendicular to the front edge of the block you're jumping to. Not very often. But in a world where you're trying to milk as much distance as you possibly can from every little strategy and technique so you can make the disgustingly long distance that the 4 block jump and others are asking of you, you should be trying to look straight as possible. If you're still unconvinced, look at this diagram. Little caveat, I'm using a drawing rather than a screenshot from Minecraft itself because a 2D image makes for a much clearer demonstration visually. This is your path when you're jumping pretty straight, but not exactly straight. See how it's a little slanted, not perpendicular to the front edges of the starting and landing blocks. Now look at your path when you're jumping perfectly straight. Beautiful. But can you tell the difference in distance between these two paths just by looking at them? Not really, so are we going to need to grab a ruler? No. Notice that we have created a right angle triangle here. If you can recall what you learned about Pythagoras, the hypotenuse is always the longest side of any right angle triangle. What's the hypotenuse here? The slightly slanted pathway. If you're not jumping perfectly straight, you're taking a longer jump than is necessary by jumping along a hypotenuse. So we've determined that in theory, it is best to jump as straight as possible. How do you do this? Turn on your F3 menu. When you can get your yaw to 0, 90, 180, or negative 90, you will be jumping perfectly straight and the shortest possible distance in any straight length jump like the 4 block. If you're questioning me now because it seems like facing, for example, 179 instead of 180 seems like a really tiny difference that won't actually end up mattering, you're on the right track. The question is this difference negligible? Yes, for the most part. Looking 180 as opposed to 179 won't help you with your average 4 block jump. Looking totally, perfectly straight will only matter for the most difficult of jumps, where your leniency is like 0.0002 blocks or something, and your coordinates, yaw, and pitch as well as timing have to be just so for you to make the jump. That doesn't describe most people's parkour experience, it also doesn't describe the 4 block. So thanks for watching this far about information that is probably going to be totally useless for you. Let's make it useful. Obviously, there's going to be a point where deviating too far from the perfectly straight path will be seriously disadvantageous. What is that critical point? Well, when you're not actually aimed to land on the block, that's a problem. But even before that very extreme point, jumping on any visibly slanted angle is likely to hinder you. Sorry I don't have a more precise or scientific answer, but really, if at any time it feels like you're looking straight or straight enough, you should be good. That stuff about looking at exact straight angles, I was just lying to you for fun for the past couple minutes. That said, I set up these 4 block jumps that actually demand that you jump on a slanted angle. Here's the math showing that as you shift the landing block laterally to make the angle even more slanted, the jump gets more difficult. If these numbers look weird to you, it's because a 4 block jump is actually a 3.4 block distance in reality, but we call it a 4 block jump to simplify things. Likewise, shifting the jump 2 blocks over is actually a 1.4 block shift, 3 blocks over is a 2.4 block shift, etc, etc. And for the record, shifting the jump 1 block over changes nothing because of the lateral overlap. Despite the jump being angled, you should still be jumping and looking straight. You always want to take the shortest route possible, right? Not only in parkour, but in general, in life. In straight jumps, the shortest path is the straightest one. In these angled jumps, going straight from corner to corner makes for the shortest path. So looking straight is actually harder and more necessary because as you deviate from the perfect corner to corner setup, the distance increases even more than in a normal straight jump. It increases twofold. I'd like to give you a formula of how to angle yourself perfectly so you can jump from the very tip of the first corner and land on the very tip of the other corner, but I'm lazy. Again. You can probably grab a protractor, figure out some angle stuff and the relationship between your yaw and pitch, if it exists or even matters, to find such a formula. But doing a rough visual approximation, like what we do when we're trying to look straight in any case, seems to work for me on the corner to corner as well. Like I'll know by the time I've hit the spacebar if I'm on a good enough angle or not to make the jump, which is kind of a general parkour skill or sense you may have already developed. There's a lot of jumps where you'll know if you're going to be successful based on the moment you hit the spacebar. How to do 4 block jumps. I got asked this, and I was using this as a jumping off point for my look straight principle, so I'd better give you an honest tutorial. However, I'm only going to cover the 4 block jump without momentum. If you struggle to do the 4 block jump with momentum, then your problem is probably not with the 4 block jump in particular, but rather with using momentum setups in general. There's a few variations of the strategy to do the 4 block jump, and none of them require you to be very precise, nowhere near as precise as, say, the triple neo, which I gave a tutorial for in this video. Start at the back, then press W and spacebar at the same time. This is known as jamming. You jam W and space, and whenever you choose to press the sprint key is lenient. It can be as early as directly after you jam W and space, which in technical terms is called pressing sprint 1 tick later, or it can be as late as when you're at the highest point in your jump. The earlier you press sprint, the greater chance you'll overjump the landing block. The later you press sprint, the greater chance you won't make the full 4 blocks distance. Pick your poison, it's up to you as to which side of danger you want to live on. Either way, once you get these initial key inputs down, you keep holding all the keys down, and then you'll land on the edge of the landing block, and the next sprint jump will carry you the distance. Very simple. This technique, if you're wondering, where you do an initial jump on the landing block to then jump again to cross the gap, is called force momentum. We do it because it feels much easier than just trying to run it straight. I don't know if it actually is easier, I assume it is. You can test this yourself using force momentum and not using it to see the difference firsthand, because that's all that really matters. Lastly, I'd like to go back to what I said at first about how your yaw being slightly off the perfect straight path doesn't matter. Well, I want to challenge experienced parkourers to create a jump where it does matter, where your yaw must be within 2 degrees, for instance between 89 and 91. A jump like this might actually already exist, in which case create a new jump that fits this condition. Thanks.
Winkle picker.
You Hypixel folks should be proud of yourselves. 2 years ago, Bedwars players were completely incompetent. They still are. No, I mean completely incompetent. I'd go 1v4 into an enemy base and find that, on the optimistic average, 1.5 of the guys there would try to fight back in some arguably identifiable way. The rest would sit in base or stand around or wander in circles, wondering if I was in their base at all. What happens if you try to go 1v4 in Bedwars nowadays? Your enemies will pool together what little brain power they possess to collectively force you out. And it's fairly effective. I mean, there's no reason one should ever win in a 1 versus 4 scenario like this. Bedwars players are starting to learn that. All they have to do is run at the invader together and left click. It may sound like I'm just making fun of Bedwars players. Haha, Bedwars players bad. Comedy moment. But no, I am genuine in my praise. This is real improvement. I think about when I played Mineplex back in 2013. Everyone sucked. They were totally incompetent in the same way that Bedwars players were 2 years ago. Then I came back to Mineplex to make YouTube videos in 2016, and everyone still sucked just the same. There was no discernible improvement. It was good for me though, it made for good content, because I could just kill a lot of people most of the time. Only when I came back to Mineplex again in 2019 as I returned to YouTube did I notice a lot of improvement, and the reason for that is because all the suck has been filtered out of Mineplex and only the sweatiest of sweats remain. The folks that have played on Mineplex for years and years and are all level 100 and have learned the ins and outs of their favorite game modes. So the skill level on Mineplex is actually pretty high nowadays. Do I care about Mineplex? No, I was talking about Bedwars originally, and let's remember that Hypixel has still maintained and even increased its popularity, so the suckage has not been filtered out of the server. Everyone should still suck, right? Wrong. There has been some improvement as I've noted, so that means the common, average, very low skill level player has risen to reasonable heights. I don't know if Captain Lee Shang came in to train all the Hypixel player base into semi-worthwhile fighters or what, but people are better now, and that's something to be proud of. Good job, Bedwars folk.